Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, Welcome to today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the people of the Yuyang and Boonlung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of RMIT University today as part of this virtual seminar, and the lands that I'm speaking to you from today. We respectfully acknowledge the First Nations people of the 5 Kulin Nations, their ancestors and elders past, present, and emerging. Welcome. My name's Professor Matt Warren, and I'm the director of the RMIT Centre for Cybersecurity Research and Innovation. And I'm excited to welcome you here today for today's event. There's going to be an interesting discussion on gender dimensions in the cybersecurity landscape in Australia. I just wanted to quickly remind everyone that with the platform that we're using today, today's going to be interactive. You'll get the opportunity to post questions to the panel. And if you post them in the Q&A bubble at the top right hand of your screen, if you click on the toolbar, it would allow you to post your questions there. Also in the toolbar, we have the option to turn on closed captions and translations if required. We have a wonderful panel of esteemed guests today, and we're thrilled to be delivering this event on the eve of International Day of Women in Cybersecurity as part of the Victorian State Government Digital Innovation Futures Festival. The festival was created by the Victorian Government to bring businesses, entrepreneurs, innovators, startups together. The festival is all about encouraging collaboration to help grow the digital economy. So thank you for connecting and engaging with us today on such an important topic. And we look forward to your sort of interaction, as I said, through the Q&A function as well. So in terms of setting the scene, I'd like to just start by providing some context. So in terms of the national cybersecurity landscape, Australia requires approximately 7,000 additional cyber practitioners in the Australian cybersecurity sector by 2024. And this was based upon a study undertaken by Oz Cyber. The cybersecurity sector suffers from a distinct lack of diversity, particularly when it comes to women's participation. There has been various studies over the years in Australia which indicate that women working in security floats around 10 to 20% of the workforce. This isn't comprehensive data. So RMIT, in partnership with the Australian Women Security Network, supported by ASD, is conducting a study to explore the factors contributing to women's low representation within the security sector, both as a matter of gender equality and in response to the prospective skill shortage facing the sector. And I'd just like to acknowledge the members of the RMIT team who are listening today. So Dr. Bunyi Bui, Dr. Leonora Risse, Dr. Joanne Hoare, Dr. Maria Beaumont, and Lockie Condolalis. So wonderful to have you here today and have you as part of our RMIT team. So the AWS involvement in this study has been facilitated through sponsorship support by the Australian Signals Directorate, Australia's Foreign Signals Intelligence and Security Agency. As I mentioned, this study will look at the gender aspect of diversity. We do acknowledge that there's other great research taking place currently looking at various aspects of diversity in security also. Today in our panel, we will discuss the significant gender and diversity issues in the Australian cybersecurity landscape. And with that, I would like now to introduce our guests. Our first panel member and speaker is Amy Roberts. Amy leads the Women in Cyber program and various student and adult industry outreach programs for the Australian Signals Directorate. She has been a volunteer with the Australian Women in Security Network for 6 years and coordinates the first Thursday of the month security networking event in Canberra. Amy is an expert in women's leadership and well-being, a certified organizational coach, and her mission is to empower leaders to create a diverse and inclusive cybersecurity industry within Australia. Welcome, Amy. Our second speaker is Jacqui Loustau. Jacqui is a cybersecurity expert with over 2 years of global experience in IT and in information security. She is passionate about security and collaborating with others to drive innovation and change within industry. Jacqui is the founder and executive director of the Australian Women in Security Network, AWSN, which aims to connect, support, and inspire more women to pursue a career in security. Welcome, Jacqui. And our third panelist is Dr. Leonora Risse. Leonora is a senior lecturer of economics at RMIT University. Her research focuses on understanding gender differences in economic opportunities and outcomes, encompassing such issues as the gender pay gap, women's underrepresentation in leadership, and the influence of society norms. She is a research fellow with the Women's Leadership Institute Australia and a co-founder of the Women's in Economics Network in Australia. Welcome, Leonora. So in terms of today, we have a number of questions that we'd like to ask our esteemed panel, and then we have the opportunity, to bring in your questions from the audience as well. So I'd like to start with the first question, and that will be initially to Amy. And that question is, why is diversity important to the security workforce?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure if my unmute button has just worked there or not. It has, excellent. So I'm very, very pleased to be joining all of you and completely honoured to be sitting amongst such great company. For me, pretty much technology has been, is used by 50%, women, 50% men, yet the majority of technology is actually developed predominantly by a male workforce. And so therefore it stands to reason that bias is being applied unconsciously to design, to development, to testing, and to delivery of technology. And so if we address the gender gap, we address diversity of thought, because without diversity of thinking, we miss the mark on strategic policy development, diverse problem solving, and innovative product delivery. So it simply makes good economic sense and social sense. So there's actually a favorite quote of mine that I found ages ago, which still stands today. And it was a reflection by Judith Spitz, who is the former Verizon CIO. And she was at an innovation conference commenting on the futurist Ray Kurzweil, who had said that technology is the evolution of human biology. And Judith reflected on this and said, we're hurtling toward a time when our biology will be equal parts technology and physiology. So think about the implications for the human race. If technology is destined to be the essence of who we are as a species, and it's being developed largely under the leadership and guidance of a single gender, that's why I do what I do, because we need to make sure we get this right from this point forward.
Thank you, Amy. And Jacqui, do you have a view around this regards to security?
Yeah, just to touch on some of the points that Amy mentioned, technology is increasing, everything is becoming digitized, and with that, obviously, cyber risk. So cybersecurity is becoming more and more important. The problems that we're trying to solve are, changing constantly, and so we really do need diversity of thought. So having different people around that table making and putting different perspectives on the table and making sure that we get different ideas when it comes to solving some of these problems. And if we think about the cyber criminals, they're diverse as well. So, we need to be just as diverse.
And it's interesting that you say that, Jacqui, because certainly the cyber criminals always portrayed as males in hoodies and sort of dark places, and that's the sort of an interesting point to sort of pick up on. Leonora, I know that you've looked at this, gender from a wide perspective. But what's your reflections on the security workforce? Is it very different to other areas?
Thanks, Matt, and hi to everyone tuning in. Great to be joining you on this panel. When we talk about diversity in the security workforce, the rationale and the comments that Amy and Jacqui have already shared with you certainly apply across the workforce more generally. And think about how our economy is moving towards an information-based, knowledge-based, human experience-based structure. And so it means that we do need that diversity of ideas, that diversity of lived experiences, that diversity of knowledge and capability and talent in order to strengthen what we're doing and to really be innovative, to optimize our problem-solving capacity, to interrogate data. Often the way to reach the most robust solution is to have a diversity of perspectives that are interrogating the data and the analysis. And so really a diversity should be conceived as or thought of as a strength, as an asset for any organization. And this is backed up by the research. So this isn't just us, wishfully thinking that this is what we aspire to. This is backed up by the research that diversity of input makes for a more robust and responsive output. That particularly applies to the security sector.
Thank you. And we've mentioned, it was mentioned before, that there's been previous studies looking at gender diversity in the security workforce. Amy, I wonder if you could tell us from your perspective, what do those studies actually tell us?
Sure. So I first looked into this in 2016, and the government commissioned a review of the information available about gender, the gender position within the security industry and cyber specifically. And the figure had been floating around about 11% participation for a long time. And all of a sudden there was a leap a couple of years ago of almost doubling of that representation figure. And I questioned that. And the response that I was able to, determine was that we weren't comparing apples and apples. We were comparing apples and oranges. So the first survey, looked at a particular set of people, and the second set, had a completely different group that it was capturing that data from. So without actually having any independent baseline statistics, we've got really nothing to measure our success or program change. So given the amount of money that government, particularly the work that I've been doing in the last half a dozen years, and the private sector invests in programs to engage a more diverse workforce, how can we know if we're getting good bang for buck, if we're actually making an impact, or if we're doing the right work, if we can't actually measure and monitor our success? And Jacqui and I have spoken about this for a long time and thought, God, would it be fantastic if we could actually have independent, agnostic research data that everybody can then use to measure program success. And voila, here we are. So I'm very, very grateful that we've been able to engage with RMIT to get this study underway. So it'll help us set the standard and that's what we can then, I can go forward and look at the programs that I've been investing in and measure success, as can other parts of the industry.
Thank you. And I don't know, Jacqui and Leonora, whether you have any comments or reflections on what you've read from previous studies.
I think just to add to what Amy mentioned, one of the other challenges that we saw was that definition of what the survey was. So in terms of, what does security mean? What does cybersecurity mean? And who were the people that were interviewed? So in part of that actual study. So a lot of that information wasn't very clear, or it was a different kind of cut of people. So was it just the people that were working in the traditional security type roles, or was it more broadly people working in the broader sense of what security is? And we believe that it's really important to understand that whole security element, because that diversity because people are moving between each of these different areas, and they all are very interlinked in terms of security, try and protect and secure people. So we felt that was really important to show that reflection across the security industry on what that means.
Okay.
I would just add to that the importance of data collection so that we can evaluate what works and also rule out what doesn't work. In a lot of these gender equality initiatives, employers, businesses make assumptions that they know, or they think they know what to do to attract more women, to try to offer more scholarships or, coaching, or encourage them, to consider a career, but they're not necessarily targeting the real reasons for the inequities in the first place. And so the data collection is incredibly important because it allows us to mark and monitor what is working, but equally what is not working, so that we can redirect our efforts to the things that are going to be effective and generate systemic and cultural change.
Thank you. Our next question is to Leonora. Women in the STEM sector is often compared to an analogy of a leaky pipe. Why do you think that's the case?
I mean, the leaky pipe is not such a pleasant visualization, but it's used quite often when we talk about equality and diversity initiatives, because it's meant to be metaphorically representative of career stages. So initially, there might be a lot of effort on trying to attract more women to study the subjects at school or university that would lead to a career in cybersecurity or into the security workforce more generally. But then there's all these other decision points along the way. So what is going to determine whether or not they opt into that university degree, whether they complete it, whether they join the workforce, and then do they progress? So there's all these pivot points where there's barriers and biases that make it challenging for women and people from diverse backgrounds all around to continue to stay in the system. So the leaky pipeline is this analogy that we're losing people, they're dropping out of the industry along the way because of these sequential barriers. Now, some of those things might be obvious. They might be like that they're looking at the textbooks and reading the materials about computer science and maths, and all they see are representatives of people they don't connect to. So it's referring to male voices and the images, and the impression they get is that this is a masculinized industry, and so that sends the subconscious bias that you don't belong, that you're not going to be valued, that you're not included. And so those little things along the way make it all the more challenging and more understandable why people drop out of the system. It's about inclusion, it's about diversity and representation. It's also about inclusion and acknowledgement and a culture where everyone feels like they belong, that their voices and skills are valued. They're not just a head count making up the numbers, but they're they are respected, it's a safe and respectful workplace. All those things we know are all very rational reasons why it can be challenging and very difficult and demoralizing for women to stay in an industry where they don't feel valued, or they don't see a future. They don't feel like they're being treated and respected in the same way as their male peers.
Thank you. And Amy and Jacqui, I don't know if you have some observations or points that you'd also like to share on this matter.
One of the things that Jacqui and I have been involved with as well has been a group to look at workplace culture for exactly that reason, Leonora, because and I'm guilty of this as well, we've invested so much money and time into programs around supporting supporting women in the industry. I think I've just dropped out.
No, you're still with us.
No, I have. Sorry, my screen's gone completely blank.
Yep, she has dropped out. That's okay.
Yes.
I can pick up where she was going with that one. So we're part of we realized quite a few years ago is that we need to support, like, our first objective is to support the women that are currently in our industry. We didn't spend so much time on the pipeline high school because we realized that if we don't have anybody left in our industry, it's going to be really difficult to then support the up and coming pipeline. So that's why we've spent quite a lot of time and effort in supporting, connecting, and inspiring the women that are currently in our industry, and try and expose them to the different areas of security that they can transition into so that they stay. How do they go up or sideways across, and really concentrating on that. The next part is obviously the pipeline, but I do love that analogy of the leaky pipeline, because I think it is really important to prioritize in terms of prioritization. And what we talk about is we need to armor, I guess, women with these kind of skill sets and uplifting them, but also the culture element is a very important part as well, which is what Amy was referring to before, with another initiative that we have been working on with other industry associations called CyberShift, which is to try and help that culture element, because we recognize that we can armor women, but we can't, if the culture is not ready for it, then it can be really difficult for women that are in those companies. Amy is back, so I don't know if she wanted to mention anything else on that, but
oh, you're just on mute at the moment, Amy, I'm afraid.
Perfectly okay. Finished off. Thank you, Jacqui. I'm back.
Okay, so in terms of retention, Leonora, what factors do you think impact the attraction of retention of women in the workforce in general?
No, thanks, Matt. This is a very broad question, and I'll focus on the things that are really relevant to the security workforce. We're speaking already about some of the underlying factors here, which is the culture and the need for cultural change to make workplaces truly embracing of diversity. One way to think about it is that we have a lot of traditional sort of legacy effects of the way that workplaces used to be in the past, and unconscious bias and implicit ways of doing things. One example, for instance, is cultures that really reward working excessively long hours and then all socializing on a Friday night, which is part of the culture of getting to know your colleagues, but that's incompatible with people who have family responsibilities or caring responsibilities. And so by default, it's excluding a certain segment of the population, or it's just making it very difficult for those people to form those collegial bonds, which then plays a role when they're thinking about who am I going to work with, who am I going to promote. We know that there are things such as affinity and proximity bias, where the people who you most relate to, you tend to favour. So there's various structures in the workplace that make it difficult and challenging for women and diverse people with diverse backgrounds to be involved. So when we're asked about what leads to the attraction and the retention of women in the workforce, we have to interrogate the way that existing conventional workplace practices are currently biased and creating these barricades, rather than put the onus on women to do anything differently. Our Australian women are very highly skilled. They have invested in their university qualifications. They have great capability and great aspiration. What's missing in the equation are workplaces that really equally value their contribution and are genuinely embracing of an inclusive and diverse workplace culture. Some really straightforward practical things are to look at, for instance, the way that jobs are described. How have you written your job advertisement? If you've been using language like, we are a super competitive firm, we're looking for data ninjas, we know from the studies that that is connoting a expectation of masculinized characteristics. And when you're writing the advertisement, you might not consciously be looking for a man over a woman, but you are perpetuating the way that things have already been done, and therefore you are perpetuating gender stereotypes and gender norms. So there's all those little everyday practical things that workplaces can do to pause and question, okay, what are we doing that's actually perpetuating gender stereotypes? How can we do things differently? Because one takeaway from this is, if you don't do things that are intentionally inclusive, you will be unintentionally exclusive.
Thank you. And Jacqui, as a follow-on, what factors do you think impact the attraction and retention of women, specifically in security?
Yeah, so on that one, I think it's the same as what Leonora mentioned in terms of a lot of the job descriptions. So just to add to what you were mentioning, it's the language, but it's also the big bucket list of all of these different technologies that you need to be able to fulfill in order to apply for it. So they're like ticking off the boxes going, oh, well, I don't have that one, so I won't apply. And that can then make it really difficult for those women to then apply. It's also about the image in regards to what cybersecurity looks like. A lot of the time the imagery isn't favourable, but I think we've made a few inroads on that. Like, I see a lot more images of women for cybersecurity courses. They've changed the names of some of the courses to make it sound more attractive to all types of different people. So there are inroads in that. We see that there's a lot more role models that are out there talking about, hey, I work in security. So that has all been positive, and I think that will help with that imagery in terms of attracting different types of diverse people. And I think that when it comes to attracting more people, it's about making those jobs more flexible as well. I think that's another big element. So I was quite lucky that throughout my career I was able to work part-time, and I even got the opportunity to do job share. And even in the head of department role, I was able to job share, which was fantastic, because that then allowed me to be able to still pursue my career, but also to look after my family. So I think organisations need to look at these other types of ways of working. Obviously, COVID has helped as well in that sense, where we can work from home a lot more as well, which has enabled a lot of change in that sense. So I think having more flexible work schemes is really important, and also recognize, but that's flexible for everybody, not just for females, but it's also the men. So, for example, my husband would love to stay at home and look after the kids, but it's just not part of his organisation to allow that. So until we have equal across everybody for anybody for life choices and things that you want to do, it makes it really difficult, I think, to attract that.
And I'm actually going to throw over to one of the questions from the audience, because it sort of relates to this. And the question from the audience is whether you think, with workplaces moving towards a hybrid working environment and having flexible work arrangements, that this would encourage more women to seek out cybersecurity in organizations that offer those hybrid workplaces and flexibility. So I'm happy, for Amy, for you to sort of reflect on that one.
Sure. I think that it's important to recognise that flexibility is needed, but that flexibility doesn't necessarily mean that women want to work from home, because COVID demonstrated that actually was a disadvantage for many women working from the home with children about and other home responsibilities. So that actually didn't add to a lot of women's careers and work-life balance, which has led to a lot of people leaving the workforce generally. We hear about the Great Resignation, and while it may not be as massive as what was originally forecast, it still is it exists for that reason. So I think flexibility is at organisations' knowledge, as Jacqui said, for the whole family. Little things can be done that don't cost anything, even in small organisations. So, for example, making sure that meeting times for executives don't happen before 9:30 or after 4:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There's no reason why every workplace should have a 7:30 or an 8 a.m. meeting, because that actually knocks out all parents from the opportunities or necessities to do pickups and drop-offs at school, to attend reading groups in the morning, to look after aging family members, all other caring responsibilities. So the flexibility is a conversation with the people that you're working with of what that actually means to them, rather than a blanket.
And Jacqui and Leonora, do you think there's opportunities that these flexible work models could offer?
Thanks for the question. It's an excellent question that's on the minds of so many employers and employees at the moment. We're still navigating this big experiment we're in. I think there are benefits and potential risks. So for some women, it will be an enabler of participation. It will enable them to participate in the workforce, as opposed to not being able to participate at all. That's a positive thing. There's also the risk that comes from what we know about proximity bias. When you're around people in person, you can form closer bonds and unconsciously favour the people that you hang out with. And so if we have disproportionately more women opting to work flexibly or work from home compared to men, then we're actually at risk of creating a gender patterned sort of segmented market, and women being overlooked for promotion, being overlooked for opportunities. So it doesn't mean that we don't encourage working from home. It means we encourage just as many men as women and people of all genders to work remotely, to work from home, to be autonomous in their work timetables. But also we make sure we acknowledge and include workers wherever they happen to be located. So it comes back to that inclusive work environment. The studies also show that it's not just about flexibility, it's about autonomy. So trusting your employees to be able to decide what works best to optimize their productivity, because wherever people are happiest, that's generally where they're doing their best work.
Thank you. And Jacqui, do you have any reflections around the hybrid situation?
Yeah, so I think there's positives and negatives of everyone's just mentioned. One of the elements we need to be careful of is a lot of the time, if the females, at home working, doing the pick up and drop off, you feel really guilty. There's all that guilt as well that comes alongside with a lot of that. So you think, okay, well, I'm going to log on when the kids are in bed and I'm going to work till 1 a.m. in the morning to just make up for that time. So I think that when it comes to those, those flexible hours, it's good, but we need to make sure that that people time bound themselves, or to put boundaries in place, and to not expect that, okay, because you, working flexibly, you're going to work really late at hours and set that expectation, I think. So I think there's just something that needs to be kept in mind for anybody that is working from home, I should mention, not just females. It is about how do we set those boundaries so they don't burn out as well.
Thank you. And I wonder, Amy, if you could tell us about the initiatives that AWSN and ASD are putting in place to diversify the security workforce in Australia.
Sure, thanks, Matt. I'll just touch on the funding, and maybe Jacqui can talk about then the breadth of what AWSN is doing with that funding. So a couple of years ago, the then government announced an investment in the cybersecurity workforce, and ASD became responsible for delivering a component of that. And so since 2019, we've actually been targeting programs that enable and increase the presence and voices and professionalism of women in the sector, but also create opportunities for women and cadets and girls to have a bit of a taste of what a career in security may look like. So an example of our most recent program that government's invested in has been a mentoring program for women in security that AWSN is leading on, and we're using technology from Australian technology with a company called OK Ready to actually deliver a platform for us to be able to have mentor matching. So that's coming very, very soon. And over the next to 2030, government's committed to investing in funding each year for programs like this. So the government invests in everything from school-age programs, so Girls Programming Network, for example, where girls aged 10 to 17 can come along on a Sunday to a local event in each state and have a crack at coding. We also invest in cadet programs that AWSN runs. We also invest in capture the flag competitions for students right the way through to high school events, as well as women's activities. One of the my favourite projects that we've invested in, other than AWSN's mentoring program that's coming, is Women Speak Cyber, for example. And there's actually 2 members of AWSN that realised that women's voices were sadly lacking on the Australian cyber conference circuit. And so they set up a program, and government funded it to train a number of women over a period of 7 or 8 months in presentation and coaching, coaching around presentations, to do a TED Talk, like presentation. And we increased the amount of women that were presenting in conferences because we've had so many people say, oh, I've got a panel of all males because I couldn't find any women. So Women Speak Cyber, set up wanted to set up a database of where we could actually find, women who were speaking on their subject matter expertise and increase the profile. So over to you, Jacqui.
Yeah, just on that point. So, we talked a little bit about, that attracting different people. We want to be able to see, when you go to a conference, you want to be able to see women up there and talking, all those, or diverse types of people that are presenting on all types of topics. So some of the funding, thanks to, ASD, we worked on a set of different programs. So what we identified was a lot of what we were hearing from some of the women in our community was that they really wanted to learn certain topics, but it was really inaccessible to them. So what we decided to do was to create some subsidised programs with thanks to ASD, to then help provide them with that technical expertise, so to really uplift their cybersecurity technical skills, and to give them an environment where they can practice their skills and ask questions and feel that they can do that, which was really great. And so that those sessions were only meant to be 2 hours, and they ended up being 4 hours because there were so many questions being asked, which shows that they really just wanted an avenue to be able to ask these questions, which was really fantastic. And we were able to put 105 women through that program last year. The other program that we had was the Women in Leadership program. So what we recognised was there was women that weren't being able to be moved, that go up, across, or anything like that. So what we wanted to do was to expose them to, okay, if you want to be a CISO, this is what you need to do in terms of those skill sets, so that a Chief Information Security Officer. So we gave them some training in that. If they wanted to be global leader, this is a course that you could do for that. Then we realised also that there was something about the emerging leaders. So how do we then prepare the women that have got really great potential? They may already be doing leadership, but in an informal manner, and help to elevate them in terms of that next level up. So we put 59 women through the Emerging Leaders program, which was really well received as well. And then the last thing was, when it comes to cybersecurity, anything in business, one element which a lot of us feel really terrified of is public speaking or presenting something. So I always have that myself in a meeting. I'll be sitting there really terrified to even talk or present. How do I say what I need to say? So what we thought was, it would be really great if we did a powerful presenting train women on how to present to your team, present to the board. You know, it's really important to be able to put your point across, and that way they can then be seen in that organisation. So we put through quite a few women through that, but also that then leads to, once they've become really confident with that, why not present outside to industry, become that new role model, etc. So we sampled all of these little programs thanks to ASD, and since then, Victorian government picked that up and went, do you know what, this is great. And I went, this is fantastic. If you want to do something like this, if we could just bring together a whole series of these different programs together, that would be fantastic. Because what happened with ASD is they said, okay, it would be great if they could only choose one, because we wanted to give everyone as much opportunity as possible. So with the Victorian government, we brought together a whole series of different programs, so they get to do a technical certification and then some hands-on training. And for the women in leadership, they get to do some presenting, a certification, and some women in leadership programs. So we brought together a blend of all those, and so they get to do that for a year, which is really great. And since then, we're hoping to encourage more organisations to get on board with these types of programs. And with ASD, obviously, we then did the mentoring program, because as part of continuing that conversation, it's good to give training, but what we really wanted to do is to make sure that they continue on their journey, and they can do that with the likes of different mentors, a panel of mentors, but also to continue that conversation with our women in leadership forums. So these women will come together and they'll still continue to connect and support each other. But we also want our male allies to come and also support in that sense as well. So I know there was a question in the chat in regards to what can male allies do, and be a mentor, support women that are in, your team, encourage them to reach out to networks, encourage them to speak out, encourage them to present. When you're in a meeting and you hear that, you can see that they've just got this, you can look at somebody and go, they want to say something, but they don't have the nerve to say it. Just offer to say, do you have anything that you would like to add to this conversation? If they actually make a point, just listen to their point and then, re-emphasize and go, okay, yep, no, that's a great point. Let's and kind of mimic and mirror what they're saying. I don't know whether Leonora or Amy wanted to talk a little bit more about that in terms of what male allies can do to help.
I'm happy to say a few things there, Jacqui and Amy, because the initiatives that you've shared there are just fantastic. And the reason why they work is because they're sending the very clear and authentic signal to women that you belong. You belong in this industry, you are valued, and we value you enough that we're going to invest in you authentically. And so I think it validates their ambitions, and it sounds like these initiatives are also done as a group. So there's that critical mass. It's not just one woman on her own. It's her thinking, okay, others are doing it, I can do it too. And that's very much our experience with the Women in Economics Network, that, we took through groups together. And so we see one of the female economists talking on the news, so others think, well, if she can do it, I've got to be a voice for women too. So it actually is self-perpetuating, because you've got that solidarity amongst the group. In terms of making sure there are female speakers at conferences, an initiative that we began with the Women in Economics Network is we created a register for our members online, for conference organisers, for journalists, for anyone who needs an expert or a public speaker. So there is no more excuse to say, I'm sorry, I couldn't find a female, couldn't find a woman to be on the conference panel, because we're like, no, we've got a list. Go to the list. And what males can do, what men can do, look, if you're invited to be on a conference, and you can ask who else is on the panel, do we have representatives, so it's diverse in terms of gender as well as from cultural background, and be ready to give up your space and to give that to someone else who perhaps hasn't had as much voice or opportunity as you have, because that really speaks to an authentic commitment to inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree 100%. I also noticed there was a comment back in the questions for what can men do who aren't in a position of leadership, and great question, thank you. Absolutely, so much, because in a workplace, as Jacqui was talking about, there's little microaggressions and little lots of unconscious bias that just occurs in a workplace. And for example, as Jacqui mentioned in a meeting, a common scenario that's often quoted, and is often seen, is that a woman will make a point and then go around the table, and Johnny across the other side of the table will make the same point, and everyone will go, "Oh, great point, Johnny." One thing that you can do as a male ally is to say, "Oh, actually, Jacqui, that was a great point that you made earlier that mirrors, Johnny's talk," and actually call out those actions. It doesn't need to be confrontational. You don't need to have to stand up and front up to somebody, but just calling out in a really respectful way points like that. If you do hear overt sexism and references to boys club kind of activities in the workplace, you can also say, "Hey mate, that's not on. That doesn't sound right. Sorry, but can we have a rethink about our language around that?" And little things such as my pet peeve is the use of the word soft skills, for example. And in technology, we often talk about hard skills, which is associated with a very masculine approach to doing the great fun tech stuff. And the soft skills are the things that the ladies worry about, the human resources and the communications. We all know that dealing with humans is the harder of the two, and actually they're power skills, they're business skills, they're professional skills. So I think that as somebody who's not in a position of leadership, you can also have great influence, and just picking up little things like that. If you read something that you're proofing for a colleague, just make a suggestion to the language change. Leonora referred earlier to recruitment ads. There's actually, I wish I had it in front of me, we can find it and put it in the chat, but there is actually a filter that you can run through your ad, and it does actually pick up gender biased language in many ways. So it can actually help you to neutralize your language.
No, thank you for that. And as Jacqui mentioned, we've got many questions posted in the chat. So I may just pick some of those for the panel to get your views on. So with a cybersecurity, with a skills summit coming up in Canberra in the next day or so, someone's posted, does cybersecurity talent migration to Australia make gender balances better or worse? And so I'd be interested, because that's already been raised in the media, about increasing skilled migration. So I'd be interested in the panel's view around that from a gender perspective.
I'm not an expert in that area, so I wouldn't be able to respond, Matt, I'm afraid.
Jacqui, are you able to comment on it?
The only thing that I wanted to mention on that is that there are certain countries where there are quite a lot of women that are in tech and in cybersecurity. So to have access to those, people that want to migrate from those countries will help us for sure, because we can't keep up with the demand from here. I don't think. I mean, I think we've had discussions outside of this forum where we've been talking about how do we increase that, and migration is one of those elements, making it easier. Yeah.
I mean, all I can add is I don't know the exact numbers or the policy, so I'm hesitant to say anything too concrete here, but obviously it's about making it equitable for all migrants. And what we do know is that migrant women, we're talking about highly skilled migrants here, they still face additional biases to their male counterparts. So even if we're talking about potentially bringing in more highly skilled female migrants who can help to build and grow Australia's cybersecurity industry, it's not to say that they're still not facing the challenges that come from being a migrant and being a female and various other factors there. And often it's about the support system. So it's not just here's a job, but what about the culture that this highly skilled female migrant is landing in? Is it really inclusive and supportive for her to grow and to advance her career in the same way that a male migrant might be?
No, thank you. We've got another question that's sort of a follow-on from the hybrid question, and it's about families moving to the country or regional areas, or because of lifestyle or because of the costs, increased costs in major city. And the question relates to, what are the opportunities for, women in cybersecurity in regional or rural areas? Is this something that AWSN is sort of focused on or reflected on?
Yeah, so I think with the new ways of working, hybrid working, a lot of organisations have made it location non-specific. So a lot of them have made them remote jobs, depending on what they are. And it really depends on what the role is, I think, in that instance. When it comes to AWSN, we have started to create chapters not in the capital city. So, for example, I know it's not remote, but Newcastle has become one of our chapters. Tasmania, we've just opened a chapter, and even though, Tasmania is quite wide, we're hoping that to connect at least people that are within Tasmania will be good. People that are in regional areas, we do want to make it a little bit more inclusive for them. So there is a program coming up that we are working on in conjunction with another organisation that is going to assist with that for First Nations and people that are in regional areas. So more to come soon on that.
Excellent. Great to hear. And Amy and Leonora, is this something you have a view on or experience of?
Yeah, that's something that as a part of the program of outreach that I work with, we are very conscious of that programs often only hit the major centres. And one of the I'm assuming most people have heard of Red Spice if they're in security. It was a $9.9 billion injection of funds to the Australian Signals Directorate. And that with that came, the imperative to double our workforce, but also to move our workforce outside of the Canberra-centric area where federal government tends to, lurk. So 40% of our staff will be located outside of Australia, but we're also increasing our global footprint. So with that comes the opportunities to move into other regional centres. If we've got, a base in a major city, then we have the opportunity to expand out from there. So one of my pipeline dreams is to actually, work with existing communities that already have connections out to rural and remote areas and increase awareness of cyber careers within those communities, particularly with school children and also with educating educators so they know how to talk about the careers and the opportunities that are available in cybersecurity. That's a bit of a biggie as well, I think, in terms of engaging the future workforce.
Thank you. And Leonora, do you have any observations or reflections on this issue?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think Amy and Jacqui are best placed to speak specifically about cybersecurity, but what we know about remote working is that it does break down those geographical divides. And often when it's difficult to attract more people into regional areas, it's people who have originally come from regional and remote areas who are probably best placed to want to go back to the regions that they grew up in. We often see that phenomenon when it's harder to get doctors in remote areas, for instance. It can work well to just go to those areas to begin with and nurture the development and the educational and study opportunities from people from remote areas in the first place, enable them to build those skills, and often then they'll want to go back to those regional areas. So if we are looking for how to spread out and diversify our workforce geographically, then making sure those educational opportunities are widespread to begin with is one of your starting points.
Thank you. We're approaching the end of the Q&A with our panel, and I wonder if you could tell us the insights that you're looking forward to gleaning from the gender dimension survey. So I'll start with Leonora and then ask Jacqui.
Thank you, Matt. So I'm an economist, so I deal with numbers, but what's going to be really valuable from this survey is hearing the lived experiences of men, women, anyone who's participating in this study. We really appreciate your input because that helps us to go beyond just the head count and just the numbers and to really tease out the barriers, the opportunities, the complexities of people's lived experiences. So your contributions are going to be really valuable in that way.
And for myself, it's about what are the challenges, just to confirm, are the challenges and the assumptions that we've, made by speaking to a lot of our members throughout the last 8 years correct? What are the things that we need to focus on and prioritise over the upcoming years, and what's going to be really useful, and how can we learn from what has been done in the past to then really shift that dial?
Excellent. And Amy, a final observation before we go to the slide introducing the survey.
Sure, I am busting to see the results of the survey for a bunch of reasons, but mainly I want to see where the gaps are, because that will help government particularly to direct program funding to where it's really needed. And I've got an amazing team of people who, some of whom are online, I believe. Hi, team. Who constantly ask me, what are the gaps? Where do we need to go next? And this is the data that's going to help us to know that. We're having all of our programs evaluated at the moment. And so that evaluation process of programs that we've been delivering for the last 3 years, plus this data, will actually really help us focus our energies from, this point forward with where we direct our funding and our efforts and our energy.
Excellent. I'd like to thank our panel. And if we can move to the slide, our final slide, because our gender diversity survey is open, and on the screen now is the QR code. So if you have your mobile device, you can put that on camera and put it on the code. It will take you the link to the survey. So we encourage that if you meet the eligibility criteria, that you can take 10 minutes of your day to complete the survey and support this important research. We'll also send out the link as well as part of the post-event comms. So please feel free, to complete the survey, but also share it with your colleagues. And it doesn't matter if your colleagues are, male or female. Please or other, please send the link to your colleagues, because what we're wanting to do is get an overview, a complete overview of views around gender and cybersecurity. So I'd like to thank very much to our guest panelists for joining us today, and more importantly, our audience, because I've not seen such an engaged audience. We could be here for another hour just answering all the questions that you've been posting in the chat. And I'm sorry that we've not been able to get through to all the questions that have been posted, that they've been really informative, and it's great to see so much passion about this particular topic. So thank you for our audience for taking part and posting your questions. We look forward to sharing the findings of this study in the coming months, and I imagine that we're going to have another panel such as this in the future, where we actually again we'll talk about the results of the survey, and as Amy said, talk about the insights that survey will give us into the future. So I'd like to thank Amy, Jacqui, and Leonora for your contribution today and being part of the panel, and I'd like to thank the audience as well, and I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.